Is it madness considering like what's going on at Chelsea right now?
It worked, right? Like they won.
Chaos and trophies.
Yeah.
Chaos kind of a culture of pay now, think later.
Enzo Fernandez, the Argentinian World Cup champion for
He needs to start getting results.
Where is the light at the end of the tunnel?
They're sort of
I believe there were other clubs interested. Manchester United, Arsenal, Chelsea close to
Maybe somebody else in between, so it could actually get worse before it gets better.
Chelsea, the club that lives on the edge. The club that changed the way we think about football and paved the way for the general insanity of the modern football market. Are they the ones who cracked the code or the ones who broke the game? You can decide for yourself at the end of this video. And you may think I'm talking just about Todd Boehly's insane spending, and I will be, eventually. But this is part of a trend at Chelsea that's lasted for 20 years. Now, the interesting thing is it actually doesn't go back much further. Contrary to what I was brought up believing through my American Premier League exposure, Chelsea is not one of the traditional big clubs in England. I mean, that's probably harsh, but they are tied with Sunderland for the most top league titles in England with 6, and only one of those was before 2003. That means Chelsea in the early 2000s was like a lot of other clubs in England, one top league title in over 100 years. But that all changed in 2003. Chelsea became something entirely different. The first club that truly realized the raw power of money. A power that, for better or worse, would transform the game that we love watching today. Because 2003 is the year that Roman Abramowich bought Chelsea. Now, that's a name you probably know. You know he had a lot of money and he liked to spend it. Russian oligarch, mysterious past. But there's very little public and verified available information about the guy. Now, we've made a video about him before, that one, and that was a relatively small effort compared to the video you're watching right now. But even that video involved me having to investigate a Cypriot shell company creator. As a result, we'll leave Roman Abramowich, the person, to one side and stick to what we can get our hands on about his impact running Chelsea, leaving judgments on the man himself to more qualified hands. But what we know for sure is that in 2003, Roman Abramowich had a lot of money and he was looking to buy a club. And it was right at this critical moment that Abramowich was looking to buy that Chelsea timed its ascension perfectly, cementing a top 4 finish to get into the Champions League in 2003 with a dramatic 2-1 win over Liverpool. Now, according to Kieran Maguire, who's the author of The Price of Football, the winning goal against Liverpool for Chelsea in that match to get Champions League is unbelievably important. The Gronkjar goal is probably the most important goal in the history of Chelsea.
Here's Gronkjar, got away from Risa! It's a wonderful goal!
Whether Abramovich would have bought the club without Champions League football is a question, but that certainly helped seal the deal. And a reason that incredibly successful season in 2003 was so important for Chelsea is, as impossible as this is to imagine today, Chelsea was on the financial brink. The club was about to default on a £75 million loan, which would have caused a financial crisis. Then CEO Trevor Birch was in desperate discussions to try and restructure the loan, according to Chelsea FC, the official biography. But it was clear to everyone involved they would have struggled to make the July payment, even with Champions League qualification. On top of that, the family of late club director Matthew Harding was demanding repayment on personal loans they gave to the club. To help pay that off in time, Chelsea had actually leveraged its future projected TV earnings to the present, which sounds familiar. As a result, the sale to big money Abramovich was a no-brainer. So is copying this awesome kit from Cambodia, which you can do on Sangalo, the official jersey sponsor of this channel. They're a website that collects smaller jerseys from clubs around the world and makes them available to people that like cool jerseys, like me and you. So check out the link in the description for access to a bunch of cool kits. Look, Cambodian flag. Big flag guy. Don't tell anybody I said that. Now, the sale was completed for Chelsea, not the jerseys, they're much cheaper than this, in 10 minutes for £140 million. And that is when the problems for everybody else started, because Chelsea Football Club began a mission to blow up every preconceived notion in the world of football. You see, the total spending in the Premier League the year Roman Abramowich took over Chelsea was £187 million. The first year Abramowich was in charge, it shot up to £390 million. £, and it has never dipped below that point again. Now Chelsea's spending that in every single transfer window by itself, but I don't want to spoil too much for you. Now, Kieran Maguire, who we met earlier, also points out that that was just the raw transfer spend, and Roman Abramowitsch also contributed to significantly raising the wages of players in order to tempt them to come to Chelsea. But it wasn't just this insane spending that became part of the Chelsea model of blowing up traditions. It was also an incredible amount of impatience that previously was thought to be only destructive for a club. In the 19 years that Roman Abramowitsch managed Chelsea, he hired 13 different men for 15 different managerial spells, spending over £90 million on hiring and firing managers alone. I mean, I realize that looks like a small amount of money compared to the £2 billion that he spent in his entire tenure on transfers, but £90 million spent on paying managerial compensation is unthinkable in the Premier League that he joined. This ferocious turnover just flew in the face of conventional wisdom from the top clubs in the league at the time, Manchester United and Arsenal, who had tenured coaches like Sir Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger, and a continuous ethos and core of players in the squad. As this ESPN article puts it, Chelsea and Abramovich were ripping up the conventional rulebook, which suggested stability in the dugout was the foundation of a lasting dynasty. And that's because Chelsea became a lasting dynasty anyways. As mercurial as the whole thing was, Chelsea under Abramovich won over 25% of the available Premier Leagues and FA Cups, 5 each in 19 years. That's to go with 4 European crowns, including 2 Champions Leagues and a Club World Cup. A perfect summary of this kind of chaotic success can be found in the career of the Brazilian Oscar, who signed for the club in 2012. He played for 6 managers in just 4.5 years, but he won 2 Premier League titles, a League Cup, and a Europa League before being sold to the Chinese Super League for huge money. For Chelsea fans, it was the ride of a lifetime, and for people not paying too much attention to how it was happening, Chelsea had just become another one of the big clubs in England. But there was a bigger impact on the history of the sport going on here than Chelsea just being able to find success with this new model, as Kieran Maguire points out. To a certain extent, that opened the eyes of other potential investors who saw the glamour of the Premier League and realized they could perhaps do similar. Abramovich blazed the trail, and many people would follow, because Abramovich had done something that had never been done before. He spent money unbelievably aggressively and got the trophies and the glamour and the satisfaction that came with winning. And thus they opened the door for other people with a ton of money and a hunger for the spotlight. 5 years after Abramovich, a prince from the UAE bought Manchester City. Then Qatar Sports Investment bought PSG. Waves of Chinese and Russian and even American billionaires descended on European football, seeking the glory that had been found by Abramovich at Chelsea. But the issue with this knock-on effect was that few actually found that glory. This video we released not long ago was about one of those owners that came over from China and did the exact opposite with the club that he bought. And as a result, this Pandora's box that Abramovich had thrown wide open at Chelsea got the attention of the governing body of football in Europe, UEFA. It was brought to their attention by all the clubs that weren't being snapped up by incredibly wealthy owners. They were ringing their alarm bells, and also ringing their alarm bells were clubs that did get snapped up by ultra-wealthy owners who either spent their money terribly or quickly lost interest. UEFA responded with something called financial fair play, or FFP, in 2010. This is a system designed to insulate the traditionally successful and wealthy clubs from another Abramovich incident where Chelsea was able to join them full stop. But as Manchester City has shown with its rather entrepreneurial approach to inflating its own sponsorships, this is a system that is still imperfect and entirely exploitable, meaning that UEFA wasn't entirely able to close the box once Abramovich had opened it. And while managing to not close the box entirely, they also put other clubs in danger of extreme financial peril when it comes to breaking the rules, with FFP suffocating clubs from Barcelona to Everton while also not entirely preventing super wealthy owners from coming in to seek glory in football. But what FFP does do is create a higher bar of competence for those super wealthy owners that want to come in and own a club. That's the bar of competence that the owner of Reading tripped over in that video I mentioned earlier. This means even if they are willing to pay their way out of an issue, they can't because of FFP. Before, in 2004, with Roman Abramowitsch, for example, he could go out and buy a bunch of players for a ton of money, and if they ended up bad, he could just eat the loss, and if he wanted to spend more money, he could. Now, well, it's a bit different, but leave it to Chelsea's next owner to continue the tradition of Chelsea FC by finding the most extreme ways to push the rules of the game. game, turning exploiting FFP into an art form. Todd Boehly. You see, Abramovich was forced to sell Chelsea in 2022 because of sanctions against his home nation of Russia and questions around his connection to Vladimir Putin. American billionaire Todd Boehly stepped into that void and bought Chelsea. This is something that he tried to do 3 years earlier in 2019, but Abramovich turned him down at the time. Boehly's willingness to put his money where his mouth is makes him the perfect inheritor of the Chelsea tradition. As is famous by now, he spent £1 billion on players in his first 15 months in charge of Chelsea. That's half of what Roman Abramovich spent in 19 years, and what he was doing was thought to be insane. Now, what Boehly did, you would think would be impossible. Now we have FFP and financial regulation, but adhering to the Chelsea strategy, Boehly managed to find something of a loophole that nobody had ever quite exploited this aggressively before to allow him to spend like crazy anyways. Boehly was the first person to take it to its natural extreme. Speaking of natural extremes, I'm going to be making even more YouTube videos that hopefully you guys enjoy. It's going to be in a new YouTube channel that you can subscribe to in the description, and it's going to be a simpler editing style than the one that you're seeing in this video, but it's going to allow us to talk about a lot more topics in the world of football, which we've been having great discussions about on stream recently. Things like how Jadon Sancho's transfer actually makes sense for both clubs, or why Victor Osimhen simply needs to be stopped. Or maybe it's just keeping up with the Icardis, because somebody has to, but that's what that channel will be for. Hopefully I see you there. Now back to Boehly taking it to the natural extreme within FFP. And the secret lays in the contracts given to the players. The very simple way that FFP works is you have an amount of money that comes into the club and an amount of money that goes out of the club, and you have to keep those in touch with each other. In the Premier League, it's about $35 million per year that you can lose, and if you're in European competition, it's even less than that. It's like $20 million a year. Now that, of course, is very heavily affected by the way that you report money going out of your club. And a very important part of Chelsea's strategy is that when you sign a player for, let's say, $100 million, that amount doesn't hit your books all at once as leaving the club. Instead, that amount is deferred over the length of the player's agreed contract. So if a player is signed for $100 million and given a 5-year contract, then you owe $20 million per year on the balance sheet for that player, not $100 million on the first year. Mikhailo Mudryk, the $100 million Ukrainian, got an 8-year contract. Enzo Fernandez, who he spent $121 million on, has a contract that runs through 2032. 22 players on Chelsea's current squad have a contract that is at least 5 years long, allowing them to spread the transfer purchase price of those players out over the length of very long contracts. It was so abrupt, so massive, so ludicrously absurd that UEFA stepped in once again to try and curb a trend that Chelsea had so blatantly exposed, trying to limit contracts to just 5 years. But Chelsea actually managed to avoid this restriction in the short term by being bad on the field. Chelsea failed to qualify for European competition, so it can continue to offer long contracts because the Premier League still hasn't outlawed them. The Premier League is considering adopting UEFA's rule to limit contracts to 5 years, but much like the introduction of FFP to try and curb Abramovich and those like him, this is going to be too little and too late. Plus, the other contracts, they're already signed. The impact has already been made, and the fears about what that kind of impact could mean for Chelsea are eerily similar to what the echoes were around Roman Abramovich in 2004. The fact that this might be careening towards massive financial ruin, or at least FFP violations. See, Todd Boehly and Chelsea have continued their pioneering ways to push the envelope, but what they've done with FFP is essentially a bet. They've gone to Vegas and they've put it all on red, which is ironic because they're blue, but you get it. It's a bet that the club will make enough money to balance out their FFP by the time that those deferred balance hits from their transfers actually hit the books. And the deferred payments from Chelsea's massive spending spree at the beginning of Boehly's tenure are absolutely insane. Based off the transfers that Chelsea has done in just the last 15 months, it will owe over $100 million on its balance sheet for FFP in 2029, £70 million in 2030, just from the deals in the last 15 months. That's before the wages and any other expenses that need to be matched by Chelsea's income. So Chelsea either needs to find more creative ways to make money. It recently got a jersey sponsor from Saudi Arabia for $40 million, but it needs more of that sort of stuff, or it simply just needs to find a lot more success on the field. But unfortunately for Chelsea fans and Boehly, the sort of boundary pushing, crazy spending spending that has become Chelsea's trademark also has continued to come with the utter chaos that is also Chelsea's trademark. The uniquely chaotic revolving door at the managerial position at Chelsea has continued, despite seemingly Boehly's best efforts. He fired Champions League winning coach Thomas Tuchel after 6 matches, only to hire Graham Potter, who he thought was going to be the coach for a long time, and he gave him a contract as such. But the team sucked, and Graham Potter got fired after less than a year, getting a giant compensatory payment. He was then followed by not one, but 2 caretaker managers, the second one being former great and former manager Frank Lampard, before finally hiring former London rival Mauricio Pochettino to run the club. And the Todd Boehly chaos, unlike the Roman Abramowitsch chaos, has not produced the same sort of immediate success or trophy acquisition that it used to. The first year Todd Boehly owned Chelsea was Chelsea's worst finish in the Premier League era. That's going all the way back to 1992, before even Abramovich was on the scene. Chelsea finished in 12th. And after Frank Lampard's run as the caretaker manager was finished, in which he won just 1 of his 11 matches in charge, he laid out some of the issues. He said standards collectively have dropped. He highlighted the huge squad being an issue, adding that the incredible amount of money also led to an incredible amount of players joining the team, and not all of them could play regularly, which created big morale issues in the squad. Just look at the raw numbers. Chelsea started 37 different players in 2023. That's 8 more than any other team in the Prem. It's also worth mentioning they've been devastated by injuries in Boehly's short time in charge, with up to 17 players being absent for 1 single match against Aston Villa. But while this outrageous spending in the FFP era might not be yielding the same results for Chelsea anymore, the club has maintained its status as the canary in the coal mine, the club that's willing to push the boundaries of the game to the absolute limit, for better or worse. Chelsea simply is the club that broke football. And then they did it again and again. And they'll probably do it again, and then again. And if history's any indication, they will then do it again. As always, all the sources for the research in this video are in the description, and a huge thank you to our great researcher, Jakob, for helping put this together. If you enjoyed the video, please do subscribe, and if you want to keep binge watching, this is, in my opinion, the best video we've ever done. We went to the Faroe Islands for a week to hang out with the club that managed to get into the Europa Conference League, the first Faroese club to ever qualify for a European competition. It was awesome. So, if you want to keep watching stuff,